In 1960, my husband and I moved to Barrow-in-Furness. He was to be curate there. And found when we got there that they were preparing for a mission. But nobody, except possibly the vicar, quite knew what a mission was. They had no recollection of having one before. They didn't know what it would entail. But they were quite willing to try. But the vicar warned and said, I don't know how many people will come, what will happen. I've no idea. When it happened, the church was nicely filled every night, all 10 days of it. And the small town actually was buzzing with it, you know how small towns do. The vicar and the curate were both absolutely thrilled at it. The vicar said, that was far better than anything I could have expected. Martin said, Ian, why do you think it went quite so well? Why was there such a response to? The vicar thought for a minute and then said, with a smile, I think you better go and see Miss Raby, and she'll help you to understand this. Intrigued, Martin went to see Miss Raby, but she was out, so he went again, and again, and again, and on the fifth time, he found her in, and she said, oh, I'm sorry I missed you, really sorry I missed you, but you see, I was out visiting my old ladies, and I have to go and see them. At that time, she was 86, but she was full of the mission, absolutely bubbling with joy, and began to explain. You see, there'd been a mission once before in the church, just after the end of World War I, and she and several friends had become Christians there. Full of enthusiasm, they decided that they'd meet every week to pray for their church and their vicar. So, full of enthusiasm, they actually did it. The new vicar didn't seem very interested in mission, but the little group prayed on. They prayed on through the 20s, the Depression years, through the 30s, the years when the clouds of war were starting again, the 40s, with the horror of the war. And none of the vicars who came and went seemed very interested in what was happening in mission. They didn't seem to know about it. But they did keep the church going, just ticking over. And we're just happy to do that. Which lands us back in 1960. And that mission which seemed to turn the whole town upside down. And that prayer from 40 years before had been answered wonderfully. God hadn't forgotten them after all those years. They just had to wait God's time. They had to wait, and they had to wait a long time. But they kept on, they persevered, and it was well worth it, wasn't it? And that story became a major influence in Martin's future ministry. That you pray for something, but you don't always get it right away. Sometimes God takes longer and longer, but it doesn't mean he's forgotten it. God is still going to answer. At the beginning of during our week of prayer this next 10 days, we perhaps ought to remember that. I certainly will. If you pray and the prayers aren't answered immediately, that does not mean that God hasn't heard. It does not mean that God's not interested, that he has forgotten about it or put it on the back burner. God has waited for his time. When his time comes, then his answer comes. And then you can bobble along with Miss Raby.